Welcome, everybody, to my community, this 27th Multicultural Conference. I can't thank enough Drs. Ariano, Cintron, Berta Avila, Allender, and Coughlin, and Bettina Love, for everyone, all of the intellect and the wisdom and power in this room. I wish you all everything necessary for you, the community, and our youth to prosper and thrive and rise as a phoenix out of such painful ashes as this last year. I'm Michael Zysk. I've been teaching for about 21 years now in a variety of demographics. My heart has settled and is renewed every day by Title I students and their families for their transparency in their heart. I've been at Encina High School in the San Juan district now for about 6 years. Very privileged to be the Tier 1 coordinator of our PBIS work, and that brings me to a dimension in this project on YPAR and how we might uplift, expand, and evolve our school culture, in particular, grading practices that are more equitable and transparent. I wish to share with you a brief slideshow, and I'm going to make many pauses throughout for you to just read for yourself rather than read at you. And I invite you at the end of this presentation, if you wish to have a copy of these slides or to reach out to hear what happened with this YPAR project as it is in progress as we speak, please reach out to me at the numbers and contact information you'll see at the end. Shall we begin? We are looking very much at how we might disrupt inequitable grading practices further exposed by distance learning. We feel this, of course, on all kinds of levels. And I wish to just reframe for anybody who might not be familiar with YPAR. It means Youth Participatory Action Research. You can read for yourself what this means if you need to pause. My experience with YPAR goes back a few years at Encina when we collaborated with Capital Public Radio. Super empowering opportunity to work with the journalists of Capital Public Radio as they launched a year-long project with us, #year at Encina. It's still up. I invite you, if you are not in the community or want to learn more about what patterns Encina embodies in our region, Arden Arcade, which is northeast of downtown Sacramento, or how it represents patterns throughout our state and nation with regard to redlining and race covenanting and all of the structural decision-making around real estate lending practices that build up communities one place at the expense of others, such as our story oversimplified. And my students feel this. Any student knows this at an early enough age as to become class conscious. They asked me, my sophomores, why is our school so ghetto? What happened to Encina since it was built in 1959? I love the question. Let's go there. So we researched, we went through yearbooks. We interviewed alumni from thousands of years ago. We interviewed former teachers, former administrators of the district who were all around this decision to make big changes for Encina or against Encina. And the findings that they generated were so compelling that the Capital Public Radio team, Jessica Ross, appreciate you, shout out, their findings were installed in the California Museum. What a privilege, right? And it's a true story. It's 100, as we say. And you'll see that my students' work interrogated a very deep and very painful story that was elevated and offered to the community and any other communities in similar patterns as those affecting Encina. This particular project now brings me to a new dimension of my work in YPAR, which I want to share with you. I really desire that these directions empower you in your own questions. This is a profound opportunity as we might be shifting into another relationship with COVID to re-examine everything. Do we have to resume where we were a year ago? Do we have to? Can we reflect on anything that distance learning further exposed? Can we open up opportunities to talk with our kids, sincerely listen to their experiences and believe them as valid and authentic and lived? So I'm going to take that tack here. If you would start with me at 12 o'clock, our collective grief and loss must be our starting point. Then we're going to look at national patterns impacting American youth of all kinds of demographics, socioeconomic statuses, races, genders, orientations. Our statewide patterns naturally flow out of these national patterns. And then we're going to look at Encina's data from last year to this year to see what happened. My YPAR project comes out of this data set and my own anxieties and my own experiences of depression while quarantined and isolated and sheltered in place. I'll get into that in a moment. Let's begin with our loss. The loved ones we've lost. The lives that have been forever changed by this experience so far beyond our control. Our schools closed. Our kids disappeared into distance learning. Where did they go? What really happened? I will acknowledge with all of you that I felt very powerless about a year ago. As my students disappeared, they wouldn't respond to my emails or my texts. They just vanished. For as many reasons as there are kids, they disappeared. Their grades fell. I couldn't control this. I wanted with all of my heart to intervene, to impact any of the negativity, to change it. But the fact is the fact. We were all grieving as a nation. And I understand from other scholars that brown and black communities bore perhaps the heaviest weight, the heaviest burden amidst all of this grief. David Kessler, protege of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, called this out a long time ago, just as we were beginning to open up to the possibility that this could go a lot farther, a lot deeper, and a lot darker. You can read his quote and the link below if you want my slides to read his very helpful article from March last year that we are grieving, and there's no way around that. Let me read this slide. Pause if you need. National patterns of great gains that have been tracked by Measure for America, and a whole team of sociologists showed from 2000 to 2008, our disconnected youth, meaning those not working or in school, were turning corners. We're finishing school. We're finding work and getting on their feet and fledging. It's a word I like to use for our youth in their resilience, who make it out of all of the pits and above all the barriers that seem to have been designed and in place for vulnerable populations. COVID seems to have dashed 8 years of growth for our brown and our black youth. You can read a pretty deep and beautiful report by sociologist Kristen Lewis for yourself. I was fascinated by her findings, by the depth of the detail, reaching even to regions and counties and areas within counties of all of our states. Impressive. Read her quote, "If you'd like to pause." The link is also provided to see this report for yourself. Now, New York Times just released a beautiful article that reinforces many of the findings of sociologists and psychologists tracking youth while they were sheltered in place. Please give this reporting from March 7th, just this month, a spin. The link is provided here. It's a very humanizing, very honest, very poignant, sometimes very alarming array of intelligent and honest responses from diverse youth, sharing out with New York Times their art, their stories, and their imagination, processing a year that changed everything. Statewide patterns will understandably mirror many of the national patterns. How are our kiddos doing in NorCal, in the Bay Area, in the Valley, and down south? Again, we were witnessing a shocking display of privilege at odds with communities of color hit hardest by COVID. So for this, I turn to African American leaders in scholarship, administrative policies, and administration of schools. CAAASA has been a guiding light for me since last spring. If you have not looked at Equitable Learning in Crisis, it's a variety of videos that are so useful, so grounded, so 100. Please look into their work. It gave me a lot of solace and a lot of direction. I reached out to some CAAASA members whom I met in pre-conference gatherings, and 3 responded. I'm very grateful to Dr. Kirkendall and the San Diego County Office of Ed. And she shared out this response to my questions. You may pause and read for yourself. Dr. Garth Lewis of Yolo County Office of Ed also followed up in tandem with Dr. Kirkendall. You may check out his response to me as you pause. Dr. Dorsey, also of San Diego County Office of Ed, gave me this perspective. I particularly like his guidance in considering HBCU's policies on gradings. I thank you, all 3, for your very helpful direction I shared with my staff and the containers of our site at Encina. Now let's look at Encina. It's a case study that might bear resonance, might mirror what you find in your counties and your sites. We have a 6 through 12 program, which is finally separating into a middle school and high school again. How we became a 6 through 12 program is another presentation. We ran 2 sets of data and of 7 classes, 6 through 12. We contrasted December 2019 to December 2020, and we found these patterns of A's and B's, watch, of D's and F's, watch with me. Our data sets, our populations, 6th through 12th grade. In general, you'll see that our A's and B's went down drastically. You'll find that our D's and F's went up alarmingly. Take a moment if you want to pause. Study this. It's intense. You wish to resume a deeper dive, you can see the A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's of our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade kiddos. Watch, pause, study this. What happened in high school, 9th, 10th, and 11th, to A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's? Pause and take this in as well. What is this data saying to you? Take a pause, reflect on this. If you have colleagues watching this with you, what is it saying? There's a lot of content here. To me, our data portends that our students weren't adequately supported, they weren't adequately connected, and they weren't therefore engaging. We couldn't control a lot of this. I get that. We tried as we might and still could not win kids back into distance learning for all of the alienating effects implied in distance learning, all the classism implied by distance learning, all the privilege that is implied in distance learning. So for as many reasons as there are young people, this data suggests deep and exposes perennial problems. How can YPAR interrogate grading? Many of your colleagues might find grading to be unchallengeable, a sacred cow. However, YPAR can touch anything, even if it just opens up a conversation. Isn't that more than nothing? Isn't that more than the status quo? Garcia et al. In a paper from 2015 gave a whole new pathway to link digital literacy with youth agency in a civic context, be they speaking to staff at our schools or school boards or county supervisors, as this project and this vantage can go as far as your ambition imagines. We also want to remember our own peers, like Ruben Gonzalez, the help of Margarita Avila Bernal at Sac State. He generated a beautiful document of his high school students at Miwok High School as they interrogated and confronted the teacher discrimination the students experienced. Why not? Must be done. This is real work and this is real education. Now, some staff might say, grading is my prerogative, and they're right. By Ed Code law, it is every teacher's prerogative and professional authority to decide their grades. We're not discussing that right at all. You can see for yourself, if you need a pause, what the Ed Code really says for teachers' authority and autonomy in their decisions to grade. We're not interrogating or questioning the legal right. What we were asking is, can we re-examine what we experienced as students, elementary, middle, and high school? For us, we chose to be teachers. It implies that our experience was positive. But if we ask brown and black communities, who are often underrepresented in school sites around the nation, why is that? Well, I have to imagine that brown and black youth did not have an affirming experience in their school lives. And that's a tandem between discipline and that interacts very directly with grading. Grading is not transparent. Grading is not objective at all. The model we're using, according to Joe Feldman, is over 100 years old. It hails from the industrial era when workers were assessed by their bosses. Are we bosses in an industrial facility? Are our kids industrial laborers? We'd like to think not, but our students often feel that way, in large part because of structures from 100 years ago in the inception of the Industrial Revolution in our own country that prepared students for an industrialized work life. Is that equitable? Is that mindful? Is it just? I say no. Joe Feldman spells out all kinds of compelling, very objective ways we can re-examine just the 100-point grading scale. The problem of zeros, and many points, very salient, very mathematically reasoned, and as objective as this discussion can get, we can lift the grading discussion out of that highly personal, highly charged place of virtual religion or politics or sports. We can discuss this if we ask different questions about it. And to that end, I think YPAR can and should ask some really obvious questions. The first step that I took with YPAR was to just get some example questions going for my students. There was a whole array of 3, keeping it very direct and simple. These questions became mentor questions, so to speak, that got my students into the frame of thinking about grading in another way, as if to ask. The first question: I feel like grades do or do not reflect what I understand because. Take a moment, pause on this slide, and read for yourself what some students said, for and against. The second question: when teachers give me grades, they need to understand that, here's some reality, we know this, but our policies don't embrace this. See what my students said. Your students might be very resonant with this. Pause and read them. The third question in our step 1, when I hear that grades are coming out, I often feel because. These are 3 examples that I found most compelling from my students. Pause and read them for yourself. Now, step 2 asks my students to come up with their own questions. 11 solid, individual, authentic, kid-speak questions emerged. Pause and read them for yourself. How do those questions feel to you? To me, I was completely impressed. Duh, kids can ask questions. Kids can interrogate. And if we take seriously their perspective and their experience, it's only reasonable, it's only mindful, it's only just that we give them the space to then ask their peers. Of those 11 questions, I asked my class to choose 5, and of those 5, 3. And here's what they came up with. I'm going to now shift over. I'm going to pause for a moment and ask you to see a slide pitch from one of my students, Tabassum Barksai, because my students reached out to participating English classes with a live or video Flipgrid pitch of these 3 questions. And you'll get an example of a feeling from a pitch from Tabassum here in her Flipgrid. Let's watch how an English class saw a peer ask these questions. And we load. Give me a moment. Thank you, everybody. Here's Tabassum.
Hello, my name is Tabassum and I'm in the 11th grade. I'm going to speak to you today on behalf of the Restorative Justice team here at Encina, and we're conducting a quick survey that's going into a larger project for student feedback about their feelings about grades and just being graded in general. We'll ask you 3 questions and we'll hope that it'll help us make sense, and we'll hope that we'll get your honest thoughts about grading here at Encina. You do know that high school and middle school is separating this August, right? So this is our chance to tell the design teams what we feel could make grading fair and just clear. Okay? So the 3 questions are as followed. Why is school so stressful for you? Do grades have an impact on how you feel about yourself? And if so, why? And why do you think school is so stressful for students?
Excuse me.
And how can teachers change this? You're going to answer these questions in a quick survey provided by your English teacher now. Thank you for your time. I wish you guys the best of luck. Keep on keeping on.
All right. Thank you, Tabassum. It was a brilliant piece. I'm very happy, very empowered by her questions. She killed this. Where I wish to return now is to our slides. Let's look at what step 3 yielded. That is all in progress right now. As we speak, the students are analyzing their findings of their classes. About 13 English teachers participated. Teachers of 13 classes participated. That's what I meant to say. And we're about to go over this data as a team of students. We're going to share out our findings hopefully next week in our first of 2 design team meetings, where they will speak what students have said about this simple but complicated question of grading. We're going to anticipate then internalizing what Joe Feldman recommends from Grading for Equity, and we're going to essentialize that into simple terms that students can clearly grasp and feel as an alternative to the traditional grading system that everybody knows as grading. And we hope to gather feedback from students whom my student team surveys. We're going to ask about everything. Why is there a 100-point scale? Are there alternatives? Yes. Why are there zeros? Is there an alternative? Yes. All of these are very grounded, very pragmatic, and very rational. The final step is for the student team in their YPAR work to share out a second time to the design team what students said or felt about alternatives to traditional grading. And that will complete this YPAR project. It has a lot of promise as our site is in a lot of flux, both returning to school and redesigning our programs where middle school and high school separate. This is the time, this is the chance to ask this question while everything is up in the air. It's productive, it's grounded, and it's youth-centered. If you want this slideshow, you want to hear what happened in steps 4, 5, and 6, reach out to me. Here's my Instagram, my Facebook, Michael Zysk at sanjuan.edu. If you're an emailer, or you can use the good old telly and reach out to me. I would love to hear from you and collaborate and hear what you might be up to with regards to grading practices as well. I want to thank you very much for participating in this work with me, and I wish you all the best today in your work, in your collegiality, and your empowerment this day of our 27th Multicultural Conference. Thank you so much.